QSO Today, episode 479, Ante Laurijssen VA2BBW. This episode of QSO Today is listener-sponsored. Only you can keep the QSO Today podcast coming to you every weekend since 2014. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor banner on the show notes page or at the top of the QSOtoday.com webpage. I want to thank Lee Barrett, K7NM, Harold Hall, WB5KZO, and Richard Gutnick, NZ2I, who all became listener sponsors this week. Your sponsorships keep QSO Today on the air. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio? Do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. Ante Laurijssen VA2BBW enjoys the simple art of chasing DX and making contacts on CW, QRP, and low-power modes from Gatineau in Southwest Quebec, Canada. Ante is a Radio Amateurs of Canada Awards manager, and he enjoys giving back to the hobby. VA2BBW is my QSO Today. VA2BBW, this is Eric 4Z1UG. Are you there, Ante?
4Z1UG, this is VA2BBW. I copy 100%.
I'm looking at a beautiful, I thought it was a podcast studio, but it's not. What is it that you're in right now?
So this is my shack, my man cave, where I have my radio set up, where I do my music as well. So, you know, what you see in the background there, the paisley and purple things hanging on the wall are actually sound panels.
To keep the room from vibrating.
Exactly. I mean, it's a small room.
This is a basement room?
Yeah.
Because there's no windows, I noticed.
There is one, but you can't see it from,
up in the top there.
Yeah.
Ante, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
My interest in radio began when I was a kid. I'd say maybe about 10 years old. I remember just randomly getting a little AM radio kit with, cardboard box, something really, really simple that I got from my dad. And it came with a little book. I mean, the radio itself was fun to build. It was a very simple little kit, but it came with a little book that talked about radio. And in there was information about amateur radio, right? So they talked about people could talk all over the world, that there were people like King Hussein of Jordan and Joe Walsh that were amateur radio operators. And to me, more than the actual little radio itself, I found that part really cool, knowing that with these, there were people that would talk to each other across the globe. So, as that lasted a little bit, but there was no, I was born in 1984. So, early 90s, there was no internet where you could just Google ham radio and then, know everything there is to know. So anyways, I later on, the interest came back a little bit when a buddy of mine got a little CB handy-talkie a few years later. And so for a little while, me and my buddies had our CBs and we'd talk to each other. And also, I found a little shortwave receiver that my dad had. I don't know if he bought it or somebody gave it to him. It was this little realistic DX360, a small portable shortwave receiver. And I remember when I discovered that fascinated me again and, kind of rekindled the interest in amateur radio. I guess I was about maybe 12 or 13. And I would, I'd go to bed, I'd turn it on and I'd listen to it until I fell asleep. All these, shortwave AM broadcast stations from all over the world. But again, at that time, right, you don't have a job, you don't have money. I was reading about ham radio. I found some CQ magazines and things like that. And I thought, one of these days I'll get into this when I'm a bit older and I want to be able to talk to people all over the world as well.
What was the hometown?
So I was born in Gatineau, which is just across the river from Ottawa, Canada, the nation's capital. So I grew up, I spent most of my childhood there. Then I moved around a bit, but I stayed in the general Ottawa, Gatineau area.
And your QTH is now in?
It's in Gatineau.
You're in the hometown.
I am in the hometown. Yeah.
And are your parents still in the hometown?
Yep, they are. Parents, my grandparents on my mom's side as well. So yeah, my dad is from the Netherlands. So he moved over here when met my mom and they got married, and he stayed here ever since. Parents are not together anymore, but my dad stayed here and he lives same town as well.
Is your father handy? Did he have a shop in the garage and all that stuff? Not growing up. I mean, he's a handy guy, but we weren't exposed to it that much when we were kids. Did this early interest in radio kind of define the direction that you went in for your later studies and your career?
In a very indirect way, in a very coincidental way, possibly. My job has nothing to do with electronics or radio. I sell mobility equipment, adapted vehicles for people with disabilities. So I've been working at the same place for the last 15 years, and I work in sales basically. And the roundabout way I got there, that has a little bit to do with amateur radio. So my previous job worked for a company that sells physiotherapy equipment, and I kind of got reinterested in electronics, right? They would sell ultrasound machines for therapeutic ultrasound, things like that. And sometimes these machines would break. And so what I did is I took a correspondence course in electronics with one of the colleges here, George Brown College. They do a lot of correspondence stuff. And so I got into that, and I started, fixing some of these machines and all that. Anyways, long story short, it didn't quite work out where I was working. And one day I said, no, I've got enough, I'm have enough of this. I'm just going to quit. And I was, I guess, 25, right? And this was a spur of the moment decision, right? I'm the kind of guy, I will think about something for a long time in my head. And then when I decided, I make the decision. It seems like it can be sometimes, it could be spur of the moment, but I've been thinking about it for a long time before. So anyways, I got back home that night and I basically told my wife, hey, I just quit my job. So, in my head, a bit naively, I thought it's fine. I'll find something within a couple of weeks.
What was her reaction? I mean, we can only guess, those of us listening, what her reaction would be.
Well, she's very, very supportive. But yes, she actually worked at that same company as well before. So she kind of understood my decision. But, we had just bought a house the year before and, we have bills to pay.
Right. Mouths to feed, all that stuff.
Yeah. So, anyways, I thought I'd find something in 2 weeks. Well, the reality is that did not happen. But because I'd done my electronics course, I applied. One of the places I applied to was the company where I work now. They were looking for a technician to work in the garage to install some of the equipment in vehicles.
So these would be what, like wheelchair lifts?
Wheelchair lifts, hand controls, secondary controls where you can activate wipers, turn signals with spinner knobs. So I applied there. I went for the interview, and then I got a call the next day, and they said, well, we really liked you, but we think you'd be more suited for sales. I had never sold anything in my life. I was, I always thought of myself as being very shy, as someone that is not good at talking with people. I needed a job. These people seemed really nice. It was a family-owned company. People had been working there for, 25 years. So talked about it with my wife, and we said, well, let's give it a try. And 15 years later, I'm still there. And so all of this to say...
Did they send you to a sales course?
No, well, I did training with them.
They would take you on sales calls.
Yeah. And again, when I say sales, this is not your typical, cold call.
These are people that actually need the product that you're selling.
Exactly. I think they saw, I don't know what they saw in me that told them I would be suited, but it actually does fit very well. And it's, I've learned since then because like I said, I've always been a shy person. I love meeting all these interesting people and hearing their stories and, helping them out at the end of the day.
Well, I live with a handicapped person, so I've found that people like you do amazing things for people that need mobility. My wife feels that because she can drive her car, she has all the freedom in the world that she needs, and it makes a big difference.
Oh yeah, when I see people, right? From start to finish, when I meet with the client and their occupational therapist, and we look at different vehicles, we look at equipment for their vehicles, the smile on their face when everything is done, when they have their equipment, when they sit in their car for the first time and they can actually drive somewhere and they can actually get their wheelchair in their car independently, it's amazing. And it's not something that most people see. People that know about wheelchairs, mobility equipment, it's usually because they know somebody who has a wheelchair or mobility equipment. Most people have no idea how many people are out there that are driving their vehicles with hand controls. Some people driving their vehicles with joysticks. It's fascinating.
Well, maybe it's better that we don't know the number of people.
Well,
it's a fascinating idea.
These people they get, here in Canada anyways, they have to be evaluated. It's not easy. And some therapists are very, very strict with the evaluation. And it's, these people that are driving on the street are.
Is this because these products are funded by the government? It's part of the National Health Plan?
Yeah, there's a national healthcare, but each province has their own system. So this is an interesting situation where I live because I live in Gatineau, which is in the province of Quebec. I work in Ottawa, which is in the province of Ontario. And we have clients from both sides of the river. But there's a river that separates them. Anyways, in Ontario, there's no funding whatsoever for equipment for vehicles, right? And in the province of Quebec, there is 100% coverage for the equipment. So, in both provinces, people still have to go through a whole training program for driving, right? If they don't have the condition on their driver's license, like me, I would not be allowed to drive with hand controls. Right, because I don't have that condition on my driver's license. You have to be evaluated, assessed, and then the Ministry of Transport of Ontario will grant you that condition, or in Quebec, the SAAQ will give you that permission.
So you deliver a vehicle with new hand controls for a client.
Yeah.
Who trains him how to drive the car?
The occupational therapist.
Oh, so the occupational therapist has something on their license that allows them to drive with hand controls? Or they're sitting in the co-pilot seat hoping that the...
So they're usually sitting in the co-pilot seat with a driving instructor from a driving school. The driving instructor is mostly there to make sure that they're, following all the rules correctly, but the occupational therapist is the person that will basically evaluate what equipment best fits their needs and assess, whether or not physically they're able to do it, cognitively, if they have the capacity to do it as well.
There's a screening process involved before the order is even made for a van that's specially equipped. The occupational therapist is working with the patient to determine exactly what kind of controls are going to go in.
Oh yeah, for sure. And for us to be even allowed to install the equipment, we have to make sure that the person is, has the proper qualifications, right? So, if John Smith walks in and says, I want hand controls in my car. Well, we can't just say, yes, we'll do that. We have to make sure that he's got the, proper condition on his license or that he has a prescription from a therapist. So there are a lot of rules. So the people that are driving for the most part are safe. I've seen a lot of, able-bodied people that are
not safe.
Yeah, that I wonder if they got their license,
Well, I think we all have. Okay, so how did that end up getting you to the point of amateur radio?
So I'll rewind back a little bit. Amateur radio has always been an interest. And when I, pardon me, in my 20s, I got into computers, Linux and stuff like that, and all the open source world. And that, funny enough, that kind of brought back the interest in amateur radio. There's a lot of amateur radio operators are Linux nerds as well. And the whole, experimenting, tinkering. so that got me interested in amateur radio again. So I decided, all right, well, I'll study for the test. And as is typical of what I do, I did everything on my own, and I found an examiner on my own, and I got my ticket. So I think probably my interest in Linux and computers kind of rekindled the interest in amateur radio. And, in my 20s, I had the resources, and internet was there also. So, it was a lot easier to find information.
By that time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you got your first license in what year?
In 2008.
How old were you?
Going on 24, but yeah.
What's the first license class there? Did you go for the first one, or did you try to go up the ladder? How does that work there?
So in Canada, you've got basically 3 classes, right? You've got 2, and then you can do the Morse code. So you've got your basic and your advanced, but you can also do the basic with honors. So in Canada, if you pass your basic exam, you have access to, VHF, the 2 meters, 70 centimeters, all of that stuff. If you pass your basic exam with, I believe it's a mark of 80% or higher, you get your basic with honors, and that basically gives you access to everything, HF, all the frequencies. The only thing is you're restricted in power, right? So you can't use as much power as somebody with their advanced license, but you're allowed to use 100 watts.
And you can go anywhere in the band, like the American extra class license, for example, has its own little CW portion or its own.
Yeah, we can go anywhere.
You can go anywhere. Okay.
I don't know how, to me, the American license structure is confusing. And there are a lot of rules. Canada is a lot freer for that. If you pass your basic with 80% or more, you get access to all modes, all bands. And I forget exactly what the power limit is, but yeah, if you're using 100 watts, you're well within the power limits.
Did you get your basic with honors then?
Yeah.
And did you have an interest in CW at that time?
I did not. And that's actually one of the things that I found intimidating when I was younger. So I was saying earlier, when I was 12, I was listening to the shortwave bands, getting CQ magazines every now and then, but you still needed to do back then, do the Morse code exam, I believe. And I found it interesting, but I thought, how can I learn Morse code? That's, it's such a weird thing. So no, I did not have any interest in CW, but that interest came pretty strongly not too long after.
What drove that interest, do you think?
Probably as you tune across the bands and you hear the CW, there was something. So as you can see, I enjoy music, right? So I've been playing guitar since I was 9 years old. I play a bit of drums. I play a bit of bass. I dabble on the keyboards a little bit. Music is another one of my passions. And there's something very musical about CW. There's also a lot of good DX to be had on CW. That was one thing that drove me to learning it.
And how did you learn it?
Again, on my own.
You didn't go to like one of the groups?
No. When I first got licensed, I was not involved really in many of the clubs. I mean, I participated in some of the local nets, and I did go to some of the meetings of the Ottawa Club. But I was very much, doing all of this on my own, right? Some people have an Elmer. I just did everything lone wolf style,
How did you build up your code speed? Did you just get on the air and start at a very slow speed and just build it up like you were if you were a novice?
Yeah, basically I found out about the SKCC, the Straight Key Century Club, which is a very popular organization or I guess online ham radio club for lack of a better term. And I got my SKCC number and I just got on the air. They had in January of 2010 is when I made my first CW contact with one of the operators. They have this straight key month every January, right? So where they have special, the special K3Y call sign, and operators from across the states have, K3Y stroke 0 or K3Y stroke 7. And I just one day I heard him call CQ and I said, all right, I had practiced enough. I said, all right, you're going to do this. So I hopped on the air and I've just been enjoying CW ever since.
One of the things I like about CW, I mostly listen, but as I'm going up and down the band, it is really hard for me, at least on my 7300, to tune in a single sideband conversation that I can understand. I don't remember having this problem as a younger person, but the CW conversations are nice and kind of clean. There's space between them. They're nice and clean all the way up and down the band. I'm thinking, this is so much easier than trying to listen to single sideband.
Yeah. So I agree. And I mean, I've you and I are of a different age. I have heard this from some older operators, older than myself, that, it becomes harder to tune into a single sideband signal. And even here, like when the bands are crowded, or there's a lot of, QRM, QRN, it's difficult. Like you really have to strain sometimes, even if the signal is loud. Whereas CW, it just cuts through.
Well, I hope I get messages from people that either tell me that, oh, Eric, you just don't know how to set up your 7300, which may be true. But I find that on the TS520, I actually can tune in the single sideband, but that radio is almost 50 years old. So that one I can actually hear the single sideband pretty well. But with the 7300, it seems kind of challenging. And now this mid-show break. The future of podcasting and the QSO Today podcast is listener sponsorship. It keeps us lean and focused on providing you the best ham radio interviews since 2014. You can keep the QSO Today podcast commercial and sponsor-free by becoming a listener sponsor yourself. For $10 a month or save 20% at $100 per year, you can become a listener sponsor. I am now recording the QSO Today podcast as video interviews that are available only as a benefit to listener sponsors through our QSO Today community website. As I develop the sponsorship tier, I will add bonus content for listener sponsors. Listener sponsors, not donors, are automatically members of the new QSO Today Academy. I am building the Academy website to include access to our Sequel.io networking lounges all of the time and Academy resources including over 400 previous Expo presentations with Q&A. And additional helpful ham radio educational resources. The benefit of listener sponsorship as an alternative to commercial sponsorship is that commercial sponsors influence the content and comments in the podcast. Listener sponsorship allows a greater degree of freedom to discuss any ham radio subject without commercial consequence. I have eliminated all commercials in the QSO Today podcast from episode 445, with the exception of the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, as I think that this is a serious asset to a well-rounded ham radio education. I am not using Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon, but my own system for managing the community that could form out of the podcast. I direct you to the sponsorship section of the show notes pages beginning with the episode 444, where I list all of the contributors to the podcast since 2014, including sponsors, donors, and hams who have paid for transcriptions. If sponsorship is not your interest, then you can make any size donation to the podcast by clicking on the donation button on the QSO Today podcast website at qsotoday.com. There is a slider that you can use to adjust the amount of your donation. If you want to make your donation monthly, click on the recurring donation box. It is the recurring donations and the listener sponsorships that keep the lights burning here. Finally, you don't have to contribute anything to listen to the QSO Today podcast. You can use my Amazon affiliate link before shopping at Amazon by clicking on it on the right side of the show notes page. This will signal Amazon to send us a small percentage of what you purchase. This is the most painless way to ensure that the QSO Today project will be here next week. I want to thank everyone who has contributed and will contribute to my effort to create this oral history of amateur radio since 2014. It will eventually all be in the public domain for hams in the future to enjoy. Be sure to become a listener sponsor or make a donation today. And now we return to our QSO Today. What do you like to do on CW?
I love chasing DX. I've got a really simple setup here at home, and I'm very happy with how it performs. And chasing DX, getting my DXCC count up. Again, it goes back to that. What brought me into radio in the beginning is just these signals from all over the world, and to me, being able to contact these people, even if it's just for a 10-second QSO, during a a contest or, one of these expeditions that have, thousands of people calling them. Just the magic of, I know we all understand the science behind it now, but there's still something magical I find about, somebody on Clipperton Island that can hear my signal. That never ceases to amaze me.
Do you have a technique for pouncing on DX in order to be able to get the contact, especially if it's during the expedition?
There's all sorts of stuff you can do. There's actually a really good book that I learned a lot from. What's it called? The Complete DXer, I think it's called. I forget who wrote it, but I would highly recommend it to anybody. And I mean, the techniques in it they will be valid for forever.
I'll find the reference and put it in the show notes page.
Yeah, it's a really good book.
Somebody told me the other day that what they do is if it's a big expedition, they don't jump in on the first day.
I agree.
They let all of the big boys get in on the first day, and then they go in on later days.
Yeah, I've learned also, especially for me, I run 100 watts with a 100-foot long doublet up in my attic, right? I'm not a big gun station by any means. And for sure, on the first day, I don't bother even trying usually. And a lot of the expeditions, I was able to get them, on the very last day or a couple of days before. And then all of a sudden, I've worked them on 3-4 different bands. Whereas if I had tried on the first day, forget about it.
Now you have an attic doublet, though. That's very interesting. Do you live in a neighborhood where you can't have antennas?
No.
No maintenance. It's up there. You don't have to worry about the snow taking it out.
Exactly. And, I only recently I got my license in 2008. I was pretty active until 2015. Then we moved to this place, and I kind of took a break from the hobby. My kids were young. I wasn't sure what to do for antennas, and there was other stuff going on. And when I got back into the hobby last year, I just wanted to start simple. I didn't want to have this, big wires outside and all that. So I said, I'll just put something up in the attic. We'll see how it works. And again, don't have to worry about the elements. Don't have to worry about, the wind, stuff like that. And it works well. And the 100-foot length, I'm a simple guy, right? I had a roll of 50 feet of speaker wire, and that's why my doublet is 100 feet. So 50 foot each leg. I just took the roll of wire, split the wires apart, and yeah.
Do you have an antenna tuner at the bottom of it?
I do. So the antenna is fed with 450 ohm ladder line that goes into a manual antenna tuner.
Oh, wow. That's your all band?
All band. Simple. Like I said, I'm a simple guy. I like having one antenna. I know how my tuner works. It's reliable. I can get it to work on 80 meters to 10 meters, even 6, and it does everything. Ladder line. I love ladder line, especially if you're feeding a multi-band doublet and you're going to have high SWR on different bands. Get a good manual tuner, low loss feed line, just simple doublet, and you'll be able to work the world.
It's almost what I have here. I actually have an electronic tuner out in a box on the side of the house, and it goes straight up on using 450 ohm ladder line up to an inverted V that's about 60 feet high.
You don't need much.
You don't need much, right? And 20 meters looks just fine.
Yeah. So
what is the current rig then that you operate from home with this doublet antenna?
So the current rig I have is a Yaesu FT450, basic, all band, all mode HF ring. And I've had that for quite a while now. And it works well. You always get that, the desire for the latest and greatest, but at the prices that things are right now, and the fact that my radio does everything I need it to do, I don't see the need to change it for anything new at this point.
There's some pictures of you operating QRP out in the field. Do you also operate POTA? Are you doing anything like that? Parks on the air?
I do. I enjoy POTA. I'm not the most active POTA operator. There are these people that are, they're out almost every day. Some of them are retired, so they have a bit more time than I do. But I do enjoy operating portable. I have a group of local amateurs that we try to get together every now and then to do a POTA activation. Some of these guys I've been doing stuff since around 2010 when I started being active on HF. When I was active back then, we did some, POTA was not around, but we did do some summits on the air. There's also this group I'm a part of called the Polar Bear QRP group. They're the original, I'll say they were POTA before POTA existed. Basically, it's a group of amateurs that they get out in the winter month. They have their Polar Bear Moonlight Madness event every month. So on the Saturday closest to the full moon, this group gets out somewhere in the field. Right now, a lot of times it's in conjunction with the POTA Park. But back in 2010, 2011, it was just anywhere portable. You'd go out in the woods and we'd try to contact each other with 5 watts or less.
When you hear about polar bears, you normally think that you have to jump into a frozen lake first before you operate?
No, but I'll tell you, here in Canada, it gets pretty cold. You don't have to jump in a frozen lake to feel the cold.
Or go ice fishing with the rig?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. One of the groups here in Gatineau, they did a few activations on the river with ice fishing activities and amateur radio back in the day.
So the river freezes over?
Yes. There are certain areas I wouldn't venture onto, but along the edges, there's people that have, once it's thick enough, they have their ice fishing cabin on the river. You hear stories about, every year about somebody losing their cabin, because it went through the ice or something, but it does freeze over thick enough in areas to be able to do that.
For people like me that are at much lower latitudes where it seems to be relatively warm, even in the winter months, that seems very interesting. I should actually go up there. I've been in Montreal once during a snowstorm. I thought that was interesting. The airport didn't close. So I thought that was even more interesting, that we still landed in the airport and they still gave me a rental car even though the snowdrifts were high.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's all relative. So I have family in Holland, my uncle, cousins and all that. And last time I went to visit, they were showing me these pictures of, a snowstorm they had. The thermometer showed -5 and they had, an inch or two of snow on the ground and the whole country had shut down. And, that's
because they're not used to the snow.
They're not used to it. Yeah.
We get snow here once every couple of years. It'll snow up where at the elevation that I'm at. In the past, we had no idea what to do. We just didn't do anything. And now we kind of know that maybe we should strategically position tractors around the city just to be able to keep the main roads open. It's an interesting thing to have a change in weather when you normally don't have weather.
Right.
Let's move on a little bit. I ran into something that I thought was interesting because you said that you're a Linux user. I am too, that you like open source. I love open source. I came across SDF-ARC, the SDF Amateur Radio Club. I was looking at the website, and it didn't look much like amateur radio, but it sure looked a lot like computers. What is the SDF-ARC?
So SDF, Super Dimension Fortress, it's basically a shell provider community. So that you can set up an account and you can SSH into this Unix computer. They have a bulletin board system. They have a community of users where you can, chat, share stuff. You have your own space. People who want to learn about Unix and Linux, but are running Windows at home and they can create an account and log in, and you're in a Unix shell. I think they run NetBSD. I forget, but. And they have a community there. There are a few amateur radio operators on there. And I haven't been very involved with that group, but, I'll SSH in once in a while. I'll check the bulletin board, maybe post a message on the amateur radio, subject there and chat with some users. But I got on SDF when I started getting into Linux again in my 20s, right? I learned about that and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. You can SSH into this machine and you've got your own little home directory and you can do stuff.
Right. SSH is a terminal mode, right? Using PuTTY or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
When I was looking at your QRZ page, I noticed that you actually have multiple QRZ pages, and you have your call sign, which is VA2BBW, but then you've got QRZ pages for VA2BBW/home, VA2BBW/P. I'm assuming that's for like portable. So you've got a few of them up there. And why do you do that, and how does that work exactly?
I do that because so it's not a requirement in Canada to add, let's say I'm operating in Ontario, right? So for those who don't know, so the VA2 or VE2 is the call sign prefix for the province of Quebec, right? And VE3 or VA3 is the call sign prefix for Ontario. So the way the call signs work in Canada is you've got, each province has their own number. So it's not a requirement in Canada to I think it might be in the States, I'm not sure, but it's not a requirement to add stroke portable if you're portable, or stroke VE3 for me, for example, if I'm operating in Ontario. But it's good practice, or some people think it's good practice, including myself. And I just like to separate out. One of my pet peeves with the U.S. Call sign structure is that the numbers are kind of meaningless now, right? They're loosely associated to a call area, but nothing makes me.
No, it used to be that if you were operating mobile, like I was WA6IGR, that if you were operating HF mobile or something, you'd say WA6IGR mobile 6 or mobile 4 or whatever, depending on where you were, or portable 6, so that at least people knew that you weren't in your QTH and that your call sign actually meant that you were from California.
Yeah. To me, there's nothing more infuriating than, working at KL7 and realizing they're in Florida,
Right. I also think that the remote control rules don't seem to be right, and that is that somebody could operate from Florida a station in Sixland, a remote control station in Sixland, and use their 4 call, and you don't know that they're actually operating through a remote base station. It seems to me that maybe there needs to be some way that people actually know that they're operating through a station and where that location is.
And that's sort of why I did it. I know some of my ham radio buddies that I do the POTA with, and again, because we're right on the border between the provinces. I have friends in Ottawa with VE3 call signs that when they come and operate in Quebec, they'll use their regular call sign without adding the stroke V, which is fine. Like, there's nothing legally wrong with that. It's just my personal preference. I like when things are, structured and all that. So same thing with the /QRP or /P. This stroke P, whenever I'm operating in the province of Quebec portable, I always add the stroke P. I don't have to. It's not a requirement. I just like to do that. And the stroke QRP, that's even less of a requirement. That's just when I operate at 5 watts, I will sometimes add the stroke QRP. Sometimes that can get you a contact quicker. Sometimes it doesn't. Some people don't care and they find that annoying. They don't care how much power you're running. So don't add the QRP. So I don't always add it, but I also noticed that, when I put my logs into Logbook of the World, sometimes some operators will just when I tell them I'm running QRP, they automatically enter my call sign as stroke QRP for some reason.
Are you running different logs with each of these different QRZ pages? Are you managing the bookkeeping differently for each one of these modes? Do you have a logbook for P and a logbook for QRP?
I do. And I cause myself a lot of extra work because I'm old-fashioned for a lot of stuff. So I do a paper log when I'm in the shack. And then when I fill one of my, pages with about 20 contacts, I'll, sit down with a cup of tea and I'll enter my log into the computer.
You're not using optical character recognition as an open source Unix guy?
No, I don't know if any system could recognize what I write. But and then I keep track of which, for every QSO, I write the power I use. And it's usually either 100 watts or 5 watts. I rarely play around with, 50, 75, 76 watts. It's usually either full power or 5 watts. So I put my log in the computer, then I take my QRP QSOs and I put them also in another log. So all my contacts from my home QTH will be under VA2BBW. And then the QRP contacts, I will also take them and they're in their own separate log. Because as I said, even if I don't use the stroke QRP during the contact, for some reason, some people, when they know I run QRP, they will add that. So I've gotten confirmations on Logbook of the World for my stroke QRP when I was not using that call sign, but they just added it. So there you go. And plus it gives me a way to keep track of my DXCC count with QRP power. So that's another reason why I do that.
Now, you got DXCC, I think, in 2016?
2013, I think.
So you're at the bottom of the last sun cycle, right?
Funny story. When I first got my license in 2008, again, I was not active really until 2009, partly because we were living in an apartment at that time. The other reason is because, I didn't really know anybody on amateur radio. And again, I was doing it lone wolf style, which I don't recommend. But when I bought my first rig, so my first rig was a Yaesu 857. And I was so excited when I got the rig. I said, I'll be able to talk to these people all over the world. This will be awesome. And I get it home. I plug in my very basic dipole antenna. I think first antenna I made was a 10-meter dipole, right? And of course, at that point in the sunspot cycle, 10 meters was dead, right? So I was tuning across 10 meters. I couldn't hear anything. I'm like, okay, there's nobody there. I tune across the other bands just to hear if there's something, and there really wasn't much. And I thought I went back to the store, right? This was when I started, right? So very naive. You don't know much when you're starting out. You read all the theory, but until you practice. So I go back to the store and I talk to the guy, nice guy. I said, can you check? I don't know if I think my rig might not be working. I'm not hearing anything. So, he plugs it in, and of course he knows all the WWV stations and the local here in Canada. We've got these CHU time signals as well. So, he tuned into those and said, no, it's working fine, but keep in mind, this is sunspot cycle is at a low point. Yeah. It was at that point. Yeah. I thought, just starting out, I'm like, oh, I think my rig's broken, but no, it was just HF was at a low point.
What are QRP zombies? Are you a zombie?
Yes. So QRP zombies, it's a yearly activity, and it's basically once a year. You get on the air, you can get your zombie number, and it's just a zombie shuffle. So slow speed CW QRP, and you just try to make contacts with other zombies, and a lot of people in the QRP community are part of different groups. So you get familiar with some of the call signs. There are quite a few local operators as well that are into QRP. So it's amateur radio is a hobby of hobbies, right? And QRP is one of those, and you it's a small community of users that you recognize the call signs after a while.
Do you have a ham radio workbench?
So I'm not the most technical of hams, right? So my interest is not in the designing or building or fixing or anything like that. My main interest is and always has been operating. So I'm not the most I'm not the biggest tinkerer, right? But I do have a workbench in my garage where I play around. I'm building a 6-meter Squalo antenna right now. So I replaced some connectors in one of my radios that were those phone jacks. They were defective. So, but I do a bit of stuff, but the workbench is not the busiest place.
It's not your busiest place.
No. The busiest place is my shack here for sure.
In terms of audio gear, as an audiophile, I mean, with all of the soundproofing and everything like that, do you run a tube amplifier?
No.
Your ears aren't that discerning yet?
Well, not that discerning, or maybe I have a hard time believing some people's ears can be that discerning sometimes. So, I like to keep things simple.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA3ON, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO.
It's my understanding that you've decided to be the Radio Amateurs of Canada Operating Awards Manager.
Yep.
That seems like an ominous job. What is the job and how big is the responsibility?
It's actually it's a very fun job. So basically, I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be aware of that there are operating awards you can apply for, the XCC, Worked-All Zones, stuff like that. Radio Amateurs of Canada, which is, you can compare it to the ARRL in Canada, right? So it's our national amateur radio organization. They're the voting IARU member for Canada. So they've had some awards. They've always had awards in the past. The Canada Award, which is, I guess you could compare it in a way to the Worked-All States Award. So if you were able to, show proof of contact with operators in every province and territory of Canada, there's the Worked-All Rack Award, which, so in the States, you've got the W1AW station, right? And a lot of times you'll hear W1AW stroke 0, stroke 6. So, right, they can use the call sign in other areas. So Radio Amateurs of Canada, what they did is they were able to I guess, acquire most of the RAC suffix call signs. So, for example, VE3 ARC and VA3 ARC, right? So all those call signs in every province, you'll have. I think the only one that Radio Amateurs of Canada does not yet have is the VE2 ARC, but I think all the other ones they were able to acquire over the years. So the Worked-All Rack Award is for, showing proof of contact with at least 10 of these RAC stations. And basically the job of the awards manager is to look after the awards. I received the applications from those who want to get the awards. It's part of the job also is coming up with either new awards or ways to kind of promote the RAC operating awards, right? So I recently introduced the Canadian Century Club Award, which people can apply for if they've for proof of contact with 100 different Canadian amateur radio stations. There are a few rules there for how many per province you can have, but that was introduced recently, and I've had a few successful applications already, and we've I also recently introduced the Worked-All North America Award. So for the more DX oriented people, I came up with that. So there are currently 50 entities that are in North America, 50 DX entities. And so what I did is there are 3 levels, bronze, silver, and gold. So if you work 30, you can apply for bronze, silver for 40. And if you work all of them, you can apply for the gold. So
how do you verify? Are you using Logbook of the World, or do they actually send you listings, or how do you verify that these contacts were made? Or are you just kind of trust one side and not the other, or how does that work?
So that's part of what I have to do is verify that these contacts are actually legit. And again, I trust most of these people hunting the awards are not making up bogus QSOs, but there is a process. For each award, there's an application form. They have to fill out all the details of the contacts. And the way we do it is instead of sending us the cards or scans of the cards, is they have to have the application signed by 2 other ham radio operators, right? To say that, yes, he showed us the cards, he's shown us the Logbook of the World confirmations, or one of the things I did is also decided to allow people to use EQSL confirmations as well. Basically, they have to show us the 2 other hams have signed, stating that we've seen the cards, we've seen the confirmations, this is legit. And then always with if I have a doubt for anything, it says that I have the right to ask for further proof if needed.
So how much time does it take for you to do this every week? If it gets popular, you could be quite busy.
I could, and my hope is to have this become more popular. To me, my biggest thing is to get people on the air, right? And this is why. So the reason I decided to take on this position is because I enjoy paper chasing myself, and I was working towards one of the RAC awards, and I checked on the website, and I saw that the awards manager had decided to retire from their position, and they were looking for a volunteer. So I contacted them. To me, I saw it as an opportunity to be a bit more involved, and it seemed very interesting, right? And to be a part of promoting our national organization. I'm sure it's the same all over the world. It's hard to get members.
Yeah, it's hard to keep members too.
Exactly. So
you have to continually show value.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to do, and that's why I kind of wanted to revamp the RAC Awards program a bit. We, myself and the graphic designer, he's done a great job designing new awards. The ones we had before were, they were fine, but they were kind of plain looking. And so we designed really what I think are really, really nice looking awards. We also have the text on the award in both French and English, which, for listeners that are not in Canada, I mentioned it before. So I live in the province of Quebec, which is a francophone province. The rest of Canada is Anglophone. And Canada, the two official languages of Canada are French and English. And at Radio Amateurs of Canada, there certainly is a desire to promote RAC in both languages. And and as a francophone myself, it was important to kind of show that. And for people in other places applying for the award, the fact that they see, there's French and English, they might be interested in learning, well, why? Why is that? Part of the ham radio hobby is learning about geography, history, politics, right? So maybe by, I don't want to say raising awareness, but just by having people see, French and English, why is that? They might learn a bit more as well.
They may not know about francophones and Quebec being a French-speaking province.
Exactly. And again, also for Quebec amateurs who are looking at Radio Amateurs of Canada, right? There's always been, without getting too political or into that quagmire, there's always been, as in all over the world, when you've got two different language groups or ethnic groups, whatever, there's always a bit of a split, right? And historically, the province of Quebec, they have RACI, which is a provincial organization for amateur radio, kind of similar to RAC, but what they've done now is they're basically an organization for the Quebec clubs, right? So there's been less membership from Quebec in RAC, partly because language issue, right? So it's just my little part in trying to get, everybody can get along, right? We can.
What do you think the greatest challenge to amateur radio is in your part of the world?
In this part of the world, I don't know. I think maybe getting hams from Quebec and the rest of Canada together. There's still, again, it's not horrible, but there's still a little bit of a, the two solitudes we call them. One of the things, so I'm a member of the radio club here in Gatineau, and I'm also a member of one of the clubs in Ottawa. And I have friends in, both provinces. I'm bilingual. And I one of my things I want to do is try to get those groups more involved together, right? We've got such a dynamic on both sides of the river. Like we've got really dynamic groups, active people, technical people, and there are some that are that kind of switch around and are involved with both. But that's something for me locally that I think would be great if we can get even more integration between Ottawa and Gatineau.
Do you find in Canada that there's a big separation between, say, your province, Quebec province, or the Ontario province and British Columbia on the other end? I mean, is it like two different countries?
There is some difference, yes, for sure. I mean, Canada is huge. It's a huge country. Each province have their own little. It's also very decentralized for certain things, and each province has their own laws for different things and all that. So, there is a difference, but maybe not as much
I'm thinking that maybe British Columbian hams might think of going to the California ham fests versus going east for a Canadian ham fest, just because it seems like it's in the same hemisphere for all intents.
Yes, for sure. And there is also a difference in so the reason that people get their amateur radio certificate, right? The reason is also different depending on the province in a lot of cases, right? I know in Quebec here, for example, there was a while where a lot of hunters would get their amateur radio license so they could communicate while they were out in the woods, right? There is a large, and this one of the RAC section managers for BC was saying there's a large Filipino community out in BC, and they have their repeater. So a lot of them will get their ticket as well, so they can kind of talk with each other, right? So depending on where you are in the country, yes, there are different reasons to get your license. There are different, for sure. In that regard, yes, it can be quite different.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
I'm happy to see. Well, there's a couple of things. I'm really interested to see where all this software-defined radio stuff goes in the future. There's a lot of the main manufacturers also that are basically making software-defined radios. That's where things are headed, and that to me seems quite interesting. I see some potential to the new technology, new interesting, fun technology. I'm also excited about. Again, all this POTA stuff, parks on the air. I mean, there's beaches on the air, there's summits on the air. I'm excited about all of these because, again, for me, the most important thing is to get people on the air, right? And I think this is all these different groups. It's a really fun way to get people on the air, get people active, which I think is the most important thing. I mean, you can have different interests in radio. You can be more of a builder. You can be, a tinkerer. But in the end, it's, the hobby is amateur radio, right? Hobby is not called amateur electronics. It's not, so the radio part, I think it's important, very important that we get on the air, whether it's HF, VHF, the microwave bands. I mean, there's those are very underutilized, but there's a lot of potential there. And if we don't use what we have, the risk is always there of losing.
Ante, what advice would you give to newer returning hams?
I would say get involved. So again, like I was saying earlier, when I first got in the hobby in 2008, I did everything on my own. And looking back, I think I would have had more fun being more active with the local clubs or being more involved. I would have learned more sooner. So I was active, like I said, from 2009 to about 2015. I was fairly active. On my second go this time, so I got back on the air last summer. I'm a lot more involved. So I'm more involved with the clubs. I'm involved with Radio Amateurs of Canada. And it's been, I think maybe COVID has also kind of pushed me to be more involved. Because during COVID, I mean, nobody could see anybody, right? I was lucky because at work, I was still able to go to work, could still see people. But I think, to get involved and really get out there and meet people. I've met some really interesting people in the local clubs here. I've met people my age also, right?
Do you see many hams in your area who are younger people like yourself or even younger who are finding ham radio and getting into it? And what is the reason that they're getting into it? Are they getting into it for the same reason that you're getting into it, or do they find something else that seems to capture their interest?
So that's a good question. And that's another thing I was thinking about as well. You know, we always talk about the age of ham radio operators and, we need young people in the hobby. And I think, I don't know that that's necessarily the right mentality or the right mindset. I don't think age should be a factor. You know, it doesn't matter whether the majority of hams are over 50 or, under 30. The goal is to get people in the hobby. And whether you're 50, 80 or 20, it doesn't matter. We want active, interested people in the hobby. So that being said, so for example, the president of the Ottawa Valley Mobile Radio Club that I'm a member of, he's in his late 70s, okay? And he's a super active ham. He's involved in, all this new stuff, this new technology. He's always experimenting. He's so it doesn't matter in my eyes that he's 77, right? I'd rather have that than have a 20-year-old who's not very active or just kind of casually interested in the hobby. I have met, people my age, so I'm going to be 40 next year.
I think that's kind of the right age. 35, the new kids. Yeah.
Well, it's odd to think that, I'm considered one of the young ones in ham radio, but it's also a kind of demographic that we, not to complain or anything, but we kind of glance over it. We focus on the fact that so many hams are older, and we focus on the fact that we want 20-year-olds to enter the hobby. And then in between, it's like...
I know, at least for me, it's almost like feeling that this need to propagate our species. It's almost Darwinian that we feel that we have this need to do this. And I think part of it is because we feel that as old people, I hope I'll get a lot of messages from listeners that say, define old people. We have years of experience in doing things, whether it's building technique or it's the way we handle ourselves on the air or the way that we construct and build our ham radio stations or all that stuff. I guess we feel that this need that we've got to pass this on to somebody. Otherwise, it's kind of like all of this knowledge gone to waste.
To a certain extent, that's true. So, like, for example, there are a handful of hams in the Ottawa Club that are around my age, which is awesome. We get together during the meetings and we chat, but we also chat with the older guys. We learn a lot from them too, right? And the Gatineau Club as well. There's a whole range of ages. Some are my age as well. Yes, it's great to get younger people in the hobby, right? It's wonderful, but all these older guys in air quotes. They have a lot of knowledge, right? And a lot of the, I'll say the older generation, grew up with ham radio as being very technical. So a lot of them got into it because they were interested in the electronics, right? And that's really awesome. So I learn a lot from these people because, again, I'm not the most. My main interest is not necessarily in the building and the designing. It's in the operating. That's what I love to do. And but you learn a lot from these older guys. You learn tricks. You learn even just basic building stuff. Like for antennas, these guys they've built antennas for 50 years, so they can give you tips. They can give you advice and teach you stuff. Having young people doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna magically make the hobby dynamic because they're young. You need people, no matter what their age, people that are passionate about the hobby, people that want to be active, right? Like there's some people here that enjoy doing the Parks on the Air stuff, and some of them are young like me, and others are in their 50s, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And when you're on the air talking to somebody, I could care less how old they are.
I think that's a very good point.
Get people on the air, get active, interested people.
Justify our use of the spectrum, all that stuff.
Exactly.
Ante, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Now, the listeners don't know that we spent an hour talking before we even pushed the record button, but we certainly talked about a lot of things, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed meeting you. I hope that you're representative of the young people that are coming into the hobby who also want to get on the air and make it good for all of us. With that, I want to thank you so much again and wish you 73.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be on.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Ante. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in VA2BBW in the search box at the top of the page. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing on the subscribe buttons on the show notes page. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages. Your value for value support is recognized on the QSO Today podcast and in the weekly show notes. Use our Amazon link when you shop on Amazon. Clicking on this link before you enter Amazon will allow Amazon to pay us a small commission on what you purchase. This is a very painless way to support the QSO Today podcast. QSO Today is syndicated on every podcast platform, including Spotify and the iTunes Store. Until next time, this is Eric 4Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.